My absolute pleasure to introduce to you Pita Juarez. Pita. I'm going to do the, yeah, there we go. She's a strategic communications leader and award-winning storyteller with over a decade of experience in film, digital media, advocacy, specializing in climate and environmental justice. She's also a representative of Moms Clean Air Force and Eco Madres here in Arizona. So I'm sure you will tell us all about that as well. And she will introduce our panelists. So please give Pita a huge round of applause.
Well, thank you, everybody. Buen provecho, ya que todas comieron. I'd like to have an audience already who's eaten, because I know that I get a little hangry. I was just talking about this the other day. I was like, I was the original, the Snickers person who's like gets hangry. I'm like, yeah, I should sue them because that was me. Anyways, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros hoy. I have an amazing panel of mujeres who I am, Claudia, it's nice to meet you. And also, I can't wait to know more about you. But also just like really excited that I get to introduce my friends who are doing really amazing when we're talking about environmental justice. And what is environmental justice? Oh my God, it means a lot of stuff for a lot of different people. So they're going to talk a little bit about what that means to them and what they're doing as Latinas in this environmental movement, especially because when we think about climate, I was just talking to my Uber driver about this, it's very white. It is a movement that I myself got involved and left a job that I really enjoyed. And I left it because I really wanted to be in the environmental movement, but I never saw a place for myself there. And we know that it's not just about like, I just heard this conversation on Friday. It's like, oh, well, we're all like, plastics and, my mom puts the salsa in the plastic thing and the Tupperware. It's like, it's way more about that. I think Latinas in our communities, we're doing way more shit than just putting salsa in plastic containers, And these are the people and the ladies who are leading those movements. So really interested to talk to them about how they're doing that and how they're engaging Latinos, Latinas into the very historically white movement that is environment and climate change and climate. And so I'm going to introduce Yara. Aplauso. Viene. And Claudia. And the first question that we have here is, what are the priorities that you see Latina leaders to addressing ongoing environmental health inequities in Arizona?
Thank you. That's a great question, Pita. I'm really excited to be here with all of these leaders and with all of you. That's a great question. I'm going to bring it right back to what you said. Representation matters, right? We need to make sure that Latinas are at the decision-making tables in these regulatory and legislative spaces. One of the things that I really like to talk about is energy burden. And so energy burden is basically folks, right, especially Latino communities, Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, most of their paycheck, a lot more of it goes to electricity bills. And that means that they have less money to put food on the table, less money for school supplies. And it's like, why is it that our communities are facing such high energy burden when utilities are making record profits, right? Something that where I work in really closely is with the Arizona Corporation Commission. And so I'm not sure if Boo is right. And if you're not familiar with it, the Arizona Corporation Commission is another elected body that gets to decide how much clean energy comes into your communities, how much gas, coal, and just dirty, the polluting plants come into your communities. They get to decide how much and when to raise your rates, right? Like APS and TEP, they have to go and get permission by the Corporation Commission to increase your utility rates. So they get to decide on these things, right? They get to decide how much equity is incorporated into the different projects that utilities want to move forward. And so anyways, I digress. It gets really, really complicated, but that's why it's so important for our communities to be there. We need to have representation. We need to go and we need to share our lived experiences. We need to let them know enough is enough. Stop raising our electricity bills. Allow us to have more clean energy in our communities. Stop polluting our communities and our kids, and listen to the people, because our shared experiences are more than enough to make us experts.
Plus. I said. I think when it comes to Latinas, in the work that we do at Chispa Arizona, we have a huge number of, in our members, a lot of mothers, a lot of students, a lot of sisters. It's a strong presence, right? I think the Latino community is around a little bit more matriarchal. So it's very interesting to see, as we do, in Chispa Arizona, organizing in our communities, to see many people who have joined our movement because their mothers told them to, their kids, they brought over their kids, and like, you have to learn about this, you have to be engaged. As Latinas, we have such a strong influence in our own communities that, to enter that conversation at the kitchen table, to enter when you're like driving in the car, when you're having dinner, it's very important, because a lot of, when it comes to climate, as Peter referenced, it can feel very detached from us. We're not represented in what you think about when you think of a climate activist, right? If you open a Patagonia catalog, you would rarely see yourself represented there. If you, even if you go hiking, you rarely see yourself there. So it's really important to occupy these spaces, because we are one of the most impacted communities by climate change and by the climate crisis, right? Those utility rates that Yara mentioned, the people who are paying them the most, the highest, are folks in our communities. We live in neighborhoods that don't have access, to food, that don't have access to transportation, that are urban heat islands, because there's a lot of pavement and not enough tree shade or canopy shade around us, right? So when folks are trying to, we've had stories where folks are trying to just get bus, and on their walk to the bus, they have a heat stroke because they just can't reach the bus. And you have bus stops that don't have infrastructure necessary for folks to wait for it, right? And now you have buses that run, late. All of these, impacts Latinas directly, because, a lot of them are mothers. They're looking for their kids, taking the bus to school. A lot of them are themselves, entrepreneurs. They're trying to get to, their work. They're trying to get to, maybe they're studying. Just these key accesses that our everyday life is the climate, is what is a priority for us. I think when you think about climate in the energy sense, I know myself, I feel intimidated, because there's all this lingo and all this political wonkiness around it, non-policy wonkiness that Yara is really good at explaining, way better than me. But it just feels so, abstract, and so like, oh, how many kilowatts is good enough or whatever. But all of this impacts you. It impacts how much you're paying for electricity. It impacts how much, how long you can keep your AC going. It impacts when you're doing your laundry. All of it, it's related, and it's important for us to know and understand this, because the decisions made in these spaces are decisions that are gonna be hurting our communities and our families very, very directly, especially when we live in a state that is consistently seeing extreme heat and extreme weather conditions every single year. Every single year we're breaking record. Every single year it's getting worse. And we're very close to a point where if we don't take real action, we're just not gonna be able to move forward, And I think it's important for us to know and understand that, because, I care about my community. I don't want to move out of Phoenix. I'm sure many people can't even move out of Phoenix, but that is a reality that we are trying to face, But I'll end there, and I'll pass it to Claudia.
Yes, and I would like to echo everything that's already been said, but I'm going to bring it back again to just three really important things that I think are necessary for Latinas to be aware of. The first one is just going to be education, right? Like time and time again, when we have those dinner table talks or whatever it might be as, like there are language barriers to where they aren't fully understanding the concepts that like we talk about because it's very technical and political and all that, and so education is just so important. And I would say to a good way that I've been able to navigate that, especially for like my youngest sister's 5 years old, and so to connect it back to her is every Thanksgiving my partner and I, we go hiking, and so then when we get to the top we can see the layer of like smog that's there. Or also too, I grew up in a mining town in northern Arizona, and so for us to have respiratory issues, reminding them that climate and environmental issues are related to health, it's related to economy, it's related to all those things. Second, I would say, I'm always going to be an advocate, and I think the second question I might have the same answer, but we need to be running for office. We need to be doing those things. And the third one is it's really hard in this climate, right? We're all working. Some of us are parents, some of us are students, some of us are all of the above. And so to remember to take the time to volunteer or make those connections can be really, really hard. But as I think the last panel, somebody said, if I don't do it, who will? If not now, then when? So yeah, those are my 3 points.
And I will say too, like with everything that's happening, like, there's immigration, there's reproductive, there's, and I'm a part of like a lot of these marginalized identities. But I always say when we think about climate, it's like, oh yeah, the world's gonna die. It's like, no, like climate is a silent killer. And those are the ones that we really need to be looking out for, because they're doing these things, and yeah, you're not seeing it. It's not like ice coming to your door, but it really is. Like climate is a silent killer. If we're not watching what the EPA and what these people do and how they're focused on your communities and your neighborhoods, it's gonna kill you. You just don't even know it how you're being killed, which is like really, really, really scary. And so I want to talk a little bit about the EPA, which is if you all don't know, the Environmental Protection Agency that for a really long time, we worked great with them. Now, there's a really bad boogeyman called, his name is Zeldin. And he's in charge now, and pretty much he's like one of Trump's, like, go-to puppets. And there's a lot of really cool things that, like with VNA, at my time at Chispa, we worked on a really cool stuff on the IRA, and which is the Inflation Reduction Act. And with that, we were able to capture a lot of funding for really cool programs that were going to be helping people just on like everyday little things. If you wanted to get solar for all, you were going to get a tax credit for that. If you wanted to get an EV, you're going to get a tax credit for that. Anyways, there's a lot of those programs now that are ending. Even you getting like energy efficient stove, which is like really, really funny, but it's not, because it's like the reality of like all the small stuff that they're looking at. So there's an insane amount of programs that are within the EPA that we were benefiting from, and now it's all going away. And so with that, I'm just curious to hear from you all, like what does the messaging look like? How do you talk to Latino communities about all this stuff? Like what are your programs doing? What are your organizations doing to be able to talk to Latino communities about this stuff? And like, exactly, like, what is the EPA? Does my mom know about the EPA? Probably not, but I'm here to teach her. So is Chispa, Arizona. So, well, thank you.
Yes, thank you. You make a really valid point. There are so many different agencies, and so I think, but they all do a lot of important work, and we need to make sure that we're holding them accountable. One of the programs I would like to touch on is Solar for All. So through the EPA and through the IRA, there is a bucket called Solar for All, and it basically allocated $156 million for disproportionately impacted communities, Latino communities, indigenous communities, tribes, to have access to clean energy projects. That is so important. If we want to move forward to 100% clean energy future, we need to make sure that we bring our communities along. And that means that the communities who are at the forefront of pollution, at the forefront of environmental injustice, the communities where utilities build polluting, dirty coal plants around, right? That they have access to the solutions, that they have access to the technology, that we are able to really just get abundant solar-free energy to power our communities. And so this program, $156 million, has been, or the Trump administration is trying to rescind and pull back. And these dollars have been committed. These are dollars that could go to your community so that your local community center can be powered by clean energy, and so that they can be resiliency hubs, right? A resiliency hub is if we have a blackout, if we have a brownout, you have a safe space to go where you still have electricity, where you still have AC, where you have, where you're able to cool down. And so, and then I also think about, for example, my own experience growing up here in Phoenix. I never saw solar panels in my community, right? So I didn't get excited about it. I didn't see EVs. And so you drive by Scottsdale and Paradise Valley, there are so many clean energy projects. Everyone has solar panels. Everyone's driving a Tesla. And I think that our communities deserve that too. They deserve to be at the forefront of these clean energy technologies because they're the most impacted by the decisions and by climate change. And so, yes, I think making sure that we're holding our Congress, our representatives, like our elected officials accountable, and letting them know that they need to fight so that our communities have access to these dollars are going to be so important, right? Like, we want to make sure right now, right, in Arizona, I know our attorney general is really fighting to make sure that we can get those dollars back to the communities that deserve them, right? And I think it's also going to just be important that we really plug into state level organizing. Like, we know that at the federal level right now, they're not supporting us. They're not prioritizing Latino communities, our needs at any level. And so it's so important to try to push forward state and local level solutions. Plug into your counties, plug into the Arizona Corporation Commission, work with the legislature, organize with your communities, be a part of these coalition spaces that are pushing folks accountable to move policy priorities forward that benefit our comunidades.
Yes.
Yes, I think when you think about all these programs, I actually had a meeting with a couple friends a couple weeks ago, and we were discussing, as one does, what is the scariest scenario you could think of in Phoenix? Regular conversations. Yes, consistently the answer was no power. When we are 120 degrees and we lose our power, what can we do then, right? What are we gonna be able to do? So all these programs, that came from the previous administration were meant to solve for that. They were meant to get us ready for what could be a potential scenario for folks in, especially climates like Arizona, but across the United States, right? It was meant, there was this thing, part of the plan, there were multiple bills, but one of it was, this policy that was called Justice 40. And what that policy meant was that 40% of the investment had to go to environmental justice solutions. That means solutions in our communities. That means solutions in Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. There is folks in our own state that don't have access to electricity, period, like the Hopi Nation. And that, taking back this money means that they can't have electricity anymore. So it's very real and tangible things that, going back to our earlier conversation, people, and especially our people, I feel like we're very resourceful. If we figure it out, we're like, turn off the lights, or, we're like, nobody, everybody in one room only, and that's where the AC is going to be. Those are really, resourceful things that we have learned from our grandmas and our mothers. And also, it's not what we deserve. We deserve to live in a city that puts the interest of the community first, not the interest of profit. So now we have an administration that wants to have profit, right? At this, at the expense of us. They're going to be mining, they're gonna be drilling, they're gonna be going towards coal when we have to move towards these clean energy solutions. Not only because clean energy is better for your health or because it's better for the environment, it's also better for your pocketbooks. It's more affordable to have clean energy than to not have it. And obviously, they want the profit. Every single time we have record heat, APS makes record profit. And the APS CEO earns millions of dollars on just our back. And then they go and invest it in campaigns to get people who let them do these things, right? So it's very important to know the connection to the state because at the federal level, yes, they're taking all of this away, but we have power as a state to determine our own clean energy future. And that comes, yes, to our board, but also towards organizing, towards being engaged. There's many things that you can do at a city level, at a county level, with a corporation commission, that we should be holding them accountable, not only because this is, the only way to move forward, but because it is directly impacting us already. I don't know how much y'all paid in your electricity bills this couple months. It's been a lot. I had to be like, my sister's my tenant. I was like, maybe I'll raise her. Just allow it. She has rent control, except for the super. Because she likes her she likes her AC, really cold.
Can you explain, like,
Yes.
what does clean energy mean, right? I think like a lot of people who are not in our ecosystem are like, what is clean energy? So we keep talking about it, but what's the breakdown of what that looks like? What that is?
So there are many ways to access clean energy, and clean energy is basically access natural resources to generate energy, right? That's wind, that's water, that's solar. In Arizona, we have 360 days of solar. And we have less than 10% that comes from solar right now. It should be a lot more. It's ridiculous that we don't have this. It's outrageous. It's purposeful. We have so much ability to generate our own energy, but we're highly dependent on Texas and other states that don't have their stuff together either. So when they're when we have these power outages, these can impact us too, right? So there's a lot of things when you think about clean energy, you're thinking about as affordable energy because you're not, you don't have to pay that much for the sun. There are ways to do this. Right now, you probably are. If you have solar, you probably are paying a lot, and that's because your corporation commission has decided to make it really difficult for you to access solar. And that is also purposeful because they want to make profit. So when you're looking at all of this, when you're looking at your electricity bill, just look towards all those taxes that you're paying. Look towards if you're paying solar, what you're paying on your solar, how much you're actually earning. There are ways to move this forward, and clean energy doesn't have to be this scary thing. It just means as little as being able to afford electricity in your house.
Yeah, so again, echoing everything that they said, but I also just want to share this story. So I went to college in a small town in northern Arizona. It's Prescott, and the student housing there is built super sustainable. Like they have solar panels, they have efficient laundry machines and stuff like that. And I remember going there, and their slogan is social justice and for the environment. And so I grew up hanging my clothes outside in the sun to dry, right? Like things like that. And how Peta said, right? My mom, would reuse our yogurt containers and all that stuff to put leftovers in. So I would do that too. And everyone's like, wow, you're so sustainable. I'm like, yeah, we're going to say that that's what it was, right? Intentionally being sustainable. But I want to add that those are also changes that we can actively make by going to our city council meetings, by going to school board meetings. I know one of my friends is on a school board, and he just got, well, not just him, but, they just got approval to add solar panels to the schools in their district. And I will also say that then in Tucson, they were trying to do Project Blue or something like that. And enough people spoke out at the city council meetings to make sure that that didn't happen within city limits. I mean, although the corporations already got it approved by the county, so they're still going to make it just outside of the city limits. And even too, there's so many people who want to put solar. Like if you did a survey, everyone's going to say, yeah, that makes sense, I would love to have solar. But ultimately, there's not enough money for all of us to get solar. And something that actively working on is how can we make it so that more residential areas can have solar, because most of us these days are renters, right? So just trying to figure out like who's the person that I need to speak to make sure that things like that can happen.
Yeah, and I also want to say, like, it's so embarrassing to be like, I live in Arizona, we don't have clean energy, and then the person at the environmental justice conference is like, oh, I live in Michigan and we have like 78% clean energy, and I'm like, yeah, that must be really nice. Like we're like at 15, you guys. Like that's really really bad, and it's not because it's related to heat. It's related because we have so much sunshine. So we know that we're able to do this. And so props to Chris Mays, who I think this is in 2015. We were able to pass 15% renewable energy. And that was like, everybody was like, oh, we're really behind. So yeah, it's really embarrassing to, and especially to BNA's point, is like at the cost of who, right? You. And what you're paying for your electricity bills. I want to, like, you kind of talked about it a little bit, is like, how do you make this a kitchen table conversation? And like the way that I always bring it up with my family, because they're on their environmental talking points, but in different ways, right? Because like my brother owns a body shop, my mom's a housekeeper. So like, how do I make this relatable to them and their own worlds? And so I'm curious to see how you guys are talking to folks, because yeah, like again, right? Like people are really worried about about jobs, about immigration, especially when we're talking about Latino people. So like, how are you making this a kitchen table topic that is relatable to our gente, to our community?
That's a great question. I feel like clean energy, like it feels so hard to talk about, especially when you think about like how to push policy around it. But like Vianney has said, it's purposeful. They don't want us to feel empowered and feel, just encouraged enough to show up to these spaces. But I think it's always bringing it right back to our own personal stories. I'm such an advocate for storytelling, right? So we live in Arizona. We're all experiencing this record heat. We're all, with our families. And how many of you have seen your electricity bills come up? Yeah, I know I have. I'm like, what? Yes, that's a conversation about clean energy right there. Hey, my bill is up. Why? It wasn't like that this year. I'm putting my AC up. I'm like making sure I'm like avoiding peak hours. I'm we're trying to figure out like the best solutions to make sure that like we can keep our bills low and they're still high. And so that's a conversation right there. Well, what can we be doing? Go talk to your corporation commissioners, go plug into an open meeting and tell them, I can't afford this. You should never have to decide between paying your electricity bill and putting food on the table. But that is where we are, unfortunately. That's where a lot of our communities and our abuelos are. And it's unfortunate. And like, that's why it's so important to be able to talk about these experiences, to exchange stories. Yes, I feel like Vianney's gonna have a great answer.
That was a great answer. I love storytelling. Tell yourself. Pira, I think you touched on what is a reality that most of us, if not all of us, are aware of. There's so much going on in the world right now. It is really difficult. We are facing really difficult moments. We're seeing attacks to our communities that are very personal, that are very scary, that I'm sure you're all feeling it in your skin. So when you come about, the laundry list of things that you have to talk to your family about to make sure that they're educating, it can feel like a lot. It can feel like overwhelming, right? Folks are just trying to make ends meet. They are trying to make sure that they have enough money to pay the rent, get some groceries, and you'll survive. So it's really difficult to have these conversations, and I do, wanna empathize with everybody who's trying to have these conversations, because your folks and our folks are being also bombarded by propaganda every single day. Distractions, everybody's on TikTok, everybody's here, everybody's distracted by all this noise and all this pain. So it's really difficult to have these conversations. And it's also really important to just figure out how to have it in the best way that makes sense for you personally, right? You, in your own self-interest, like, why do you care so much about the environment? Why is it? Like, what are you scared about? Are you scared about your children? Are you scared about your kids? Do you want to see, your city thrive? Think about why it's personal for you. And I think that is the best way to connect it back, because you don't have to understand, solar means this and that and that and that. And this is how much we're going to save. You don't have to know at top of your mind those talking points to be able to see with your friends at brunch and be like, hey, I'm actually really scared because I was thinking about, what do I do if the price of food goes up because there's such, all these extreme weather conditions are making everything more pricey. Like, what can we do together? And maybe out of there, you come up with a solution where, like, hey, like, maybe we'll raise chickens together or something. Right? But I feel very powerful that conversation and that solutions for climate and clean energy always come from people. They come from the most impacted people. In all these policy folks who are writing, bills and whatever, all of them are writing bills that make sense for them, right? You would be It's laughable how legislators can write bills sometimes. Sometimes they'll just have, an inconvenience and write a bill about it to make sure that it doesn't inconvenience them anymore. So think about it that way when you're thinking about how you're having these conversations with your people. You can impact policy based on your own needs. So just like look into what is the thing that really motivates you, and that's how you have that conversation. You don't gotta know all these things that are happening word by word to be able to enter that conversation with your friends and your family.
Yeah, I know somebody just said that environmental justice is not a big issue when people are getting snatched up off the streets. But I'm gonna tell you something that my grandma told me when I was like 4 years old. She was like, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And that's how I've always looked at environmental justice. And my beginning with environmental justice really did start with food, right? And like how we're growing food and how, we're taking care of ourselves through food and how, watching the way that the environment impacts our food. And I had a little seed planting party Earth Day with like all my cousins and their kids and my friends and their kids and even my little sisters, right? My mom sent me a video a few weeks ago of my little sisters dancing for their plants in the nighttime, like really trying to, because I told them, like, if you sing to your plants, they'll grow, like you got to talk to them, whatever. My youngest sister was crying a few weeks later because their sun scorched their plants and it died. And so those are little ways that I was able to interact with them and be like, yeah, like that happens to people all the time. And kind of touching back to education, it really does go a long way. And like you said, however it impacts you. This was a point that was brought up to me literally last week that I never really thought about, but I'm going to share it with you so y'all can think about it. Natural disasters are happening all around, right? There's hurricanes, there's, earthquakes, all that stuff happening. And heat kills just as many people. And it's just not getting the media coverage that all these others are getting, right? And so those are things we need to be thinking about. And there's, we're even getting local funding taken away from cooling centers across the state. And they just made a bill about bringing your own alcohol to the golf course. So again, we need to be running for office and we need to be talking about these things.
Yeah, my wife works in public health and emergency preparedness, and so it's really now I'm like, God, we kind of have like the same job because of how much it is intersected. Well, I have one last question for the panelists, so I know we want to wrap it up. My MC's over here. What's one inspiring story or a moment from your work that reminds you that the fight for environmental justice is also important?
Yes, hi. There's so many stories, in Chispa, Arizona, we work directly organizing our communities, just thinking about my team and the way that they are trying to frame all these, what feels very catastrophic and very like doom and glooming. We always try to center it in love and joy. So when I think about, climate justice in that way, I think about, most recently we just went to the Grand Canyon. They just went. I didn't get to go this time. But the Grand Canyon is an event that we kind of put together a couple years ago, and it was an idea of like, hey, like we're advocating for public lands and the protection of public lands, but many people have actually never seen the Grand Canyon who live in Arizona, right? And many people actually haven't been able to camp in these spaces that we're trying to protect, and we're asking them to defend them. So, the team got together and we're like, okay, well, let's figure out how can we get, to the Grand Canyon. And the first time it was very troshemoshe. We just like kind of went there and with vibes, we learned a lot. So now it's our fifth year going. And for us, it's so important to take our people. And this year was the hardest to make that decision, other than COVID, because we canceled that one too. Because we know the threats that are happening when you drive to the Grand Canyon at the national parks right now. There's this consistent attempt to get us out of these spaces, right? To exclude us from the images of like national parks and being outdoors. And it's being done by this administration right now in threatening people who go to the national parks who may not have, legal documents. So after a lot of logistical work, we were able to figure it out, and it was an amazing experience, and it was really important for us to still have it because people still should be outdoors and feel the joy of being with community without that fear. So I think of that example when it comes to environmental justice, and I'll end it now because
Okay. Yeah. When I was in college, I worked for an indigenous community in Africa that was on the border of Kenya and Tanzania. And looking at the policies that are happening in other countries, we were able to get the government to help us conserve the Mara and make sure that people were getting like the proper healthcare around being out in the heat and being out in the sun. And it's like a desert out there, right? And though in that time too, we were able to help this indigenous community reclaim and like get back some of their land. And so when I see stuff like that happening in other places, I'm like, all right, how do we learn to copy and paste that here? And that's just that was like the most inspiring thing I've ever been able to work on. And ever since then, I was like, I need to figure that out. And I'm only 25, so we got time. Well, I hope we have time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I promise you, I'll give you the last word. I just want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for questions, if you have any right now. And I promise we'll come back to you because you have the final.
Yes, I'm Jamila Pino, and I flew in from Washington, D.C. because I think that the work you guys are doing here in Arizona is so important and remarkable. Especially, I want to keep nonpartisan or bipartisan, but especially ahead of the 2026 midterms. But I wanted to know, how are you working or fighting against the disinformation and misinformation that are targeting our communities, especially Spanish speaking Latinos? We see like a lot of fake news, right, on WhatsApp and Instagram and being shared on TikTok. So and especially around solar and clean energy. I want to know a little bit more about how you're working to fight this.
Well, I'll just say something and then I'll go to Yara on the solar stuff. Is that I also think like, and Yamila and I, we're comms people. And so one of the things that I think is a weakness, and I'll speak to that, is that we continue to have these webinars on misinformation. And I'm sorry, but my mom's not going to join those, And so I think it's like up to us of like how we are then delivering that to my tias, everybody out there who's like thinking about that. And I have a lot of family actually who has solar, and they love it, really because it was just there. But they now know the benefits of having that. So like, that's just more of like a statement that I wanted to point out. But yes, I am curious more of like, based off of that weakness that I think that we have, how are you all combating that?
That's a great question. I think, kind of going to your point is bringing it back to those kitchen table conversations. I know that this misinformation isn't true. I know the realities. I know that solar is clean, it's affordable, it's cheaper than ever, and our community should and could have access to it. So I'm going to make sure that I take that conversation and I have it with my tias and my cousins so that they can spread the word. But then I think it's also about elevating the good experiences people have, because they take one bad story and they run with it. And so let's make sure that we're elevating the positive experiences. Last year we were working with a partner organization, Solar United Neighbors, and the city of Phoenix helped fund 10 communities, 10 houses in Maryville to get solar for free. And I just remember talking, they called me, if I could help interpret some of the conversations, and all the tias, the tios, the señores, they were just like, thank you, mija. We never thought that we would be one of the families that could have solar in our roof. We've always wanted to contribute back to the planet, and we never thought that we could afford this. And so I thought it was just so powerful to be able to elevate those stories. And then at the end of the day, it is recognizing that there are some flaws, right, when it comes to bad actors. And so, for example, and I think this is a huge way for folks to get involved too, is how can we make sure that we are pushing for policy protections to keep our community safe? In different states, we've worked on consumer protection bills. How do we make sure that, that the solar salesperson that comes to your door, that if you speak Spanish, that they're able to talk to you in Spanish, so that that you're signing a contract in language that you understand, so that the terms in language that you understand. How do you make sure that we're able to, report bad actors so that it doesn't happen to my tia down the street or to my abuelitos? And so it is not only about elevating the really good experiences, but I think pushing for policy guardrails to make sure that we're protecting our community so that they can move forward and have good solutions, right? But that they're protected too.
All right. I think we might have one final question, so I'm going to steal a little bit of time for pictures to do this. So we'll have a final question, and if you can keep the answers fairly short. Thank you.
I actually have more of a comment, and I just want to send 2 resources. There's a group called the Phoenix Sustainability Professionals. You can find them on LinkedIn, and they have, I want to say, monthly meetups. But when we look at the sustainability space in tech and other opportunities, there's zero representation. And so just showing up and getting to know who the players are, that would be amazing. And I wanted to also share, there's also a Arizona Clean Tech. Yeah. And so that would be another place today. And it's actually, I just looked it up. So it's today, Arizona Clean Tech, and that's only 5 minutes away. So I want to thank PETA for letting me know even about today. So thank you.
All right. Muchas gracias. Thank you, everyone. We don't have any more time for questions, so I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, thank you everybody so much. I know, sometimes this could be a very wonky topic, but I think when you add Latinas in it, it gets a little spicier. And please reach out to Poder Latinx, Chispa Arizona, and Vote Solar. And thank you so much for being a part of this. If you have any questions for any of us, we'll be around. So, I want to say back in the day, it was follow me on TikTok, but that's not a thing anymore. Anyways, bye.
Let's give them a huge round of applause. We have about 10 minutes where you can stretch, you can get up, take pictures, talk to them, and we will come back exactly at 1:30.